regular meeting of council on Monday, July 13th. No additions to our agenda this evening. Looking for approval of the agenda as is.
Move approval, Your Worship.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Public participation time. This is an opportunity for you folks in the audience to step to the microphone. We are under a recording device there, but it would be nice if you could state your name and your address. If you don't want to provide that publicly, at least our recorder at the end of the table, Sam, can take that. But it's your turn, so step right up, folks.
My name's Catherine Robertson, 395 Farview Road, and I'm just here to say to the council, there are very many residents of the Colwood community at present that are concerned with planning and land use committee issues that have come up and are coming up in the future, and that we are concerned that maps are not always accurate, they're not always the same. We're concerned there's no continuity. We're not trusting the city staff nor the council as it is at present and the way they are voting on things. Wishart Road is being raped. So we're concerned, and we're hoping that the council will take a step back, quit trying to be like Langford and really think about Colwood as a whole and make us the best community, not just a slap-happy community where we have holes here and there and then raping the land and sending the deer and the animals wherever, who knows, digging down in our in the water system down at Coast Capital. Don't you know that the sea level is rising? They want to put underground parking there. The ridiculous proposals that Colwood Council is considering are utterly ridiculous and concerning. We've got a Concerned Colwood Residents Facebook page starting, and we are spreading the word. Thank you.
Any other members of the public? Third and final time. Thank you, folks. We'll move on. Next one is Mayor's Message. There are a couple of items. Just for information purposes, we have received a notification from the View Royal Council, Mayor and Council, in regards to the Portage Trail at Shoreline Community School. It is now completed and open, which connects through from Shoreline Community School through to the Esquimalt Harbor. So kudos for that project getting completed. The other one is an opportunity on Tuesday, August the 18th from 8 till 10. There will be a Take Back the Night walking event along the Galloping Goose Trail from Glen Lake through to the Hatley Cemetery and then up Hagel Road to join VMP and back down to Veterans Memorial Park in Langford. We will be posting it on our events page. If anyone wants any further information, you can get it on our website. Further to that, this is our last council meeting scheduled for the summer break. We will resume our council meetings on August the 31st. And with that, I want to wish council and staff, for those who get the holidays and time off, to take advantage of that, because we have lots of work to do. So that's all from me. Item number 4.1 is adoption of the regular meeting council minutes of June the 22nd.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Receipt on a number of minutes this evening. Planning and Land Use, June 16th. Planning and Land Use, June 2nd. Protective Services, April 15th. Transportation and Public Infrastructure, June 1st.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Correspondence requiring action, nothing today. New business, 6.1, Parks and Recreation and Culture Committee, a verbal report, Chief Administrative Officer, in regards to Wishart Parks Rec Society, City of Colwood Panorama, and the KRAFT Hockeyville event.
Thank you, Your Worship. As Council is aware, KRAFT Hockeyville is going to be playing at the Q Center on September the 21st, which is a Monday. The arena holds about 2,500 spectators. Part of the event is that they normally have a tailgate party with big screens watching the game. It's essentially a viewing party from somewhere outside of the arena. And the game starts at 7 o'clock, the viewing party, and I think the festivities start anytime after about 4. KRAFT is expecting about 4,000 to 7,000 people for one of their typical viewing parties. They've advised, or we're aware that they're willing to pay for the entire event, things like screens, security, bleachers, those types of things. We were asked at the staff level to consider any potential site in Colwood for this viewing party because our understanding is that it would not be held at Panorama. The geographic proximity is just too far away. And we came up with this suggestion of Fort Rod Hill. The communications officer has been in contact with West Shore Parks and Rec to discuss this. I think that they think that that's a pretty viable site. And we've also been in contact with KRAFT. They've heard our idea to host the viewing party at Fort Rod Hill, and KRAFT is taking it back to their team for discussion. And we did not hear anything further by the close of business today from KRAFT. So they've heard our idea. They're taking it back for discussion. And what I'm seeking at this point in time is essentially a motion. And I'm suggesting that Council adopt a motion that you endorse in principle this event taking place at Fort Rod Hill, but that the matter be referred back to staff to obtain further details from KRAFT Hockeyville, particularly in regards to the nature and extent of any associated resource and financial costs that may be incurred by the city with respect particularly to event organization, logistical, material supplies, and any associated bylaw enforcement and policing costs. KRAFT basically, I believe are going to be the principal organizers of this event. Will supply and pay for most of the materials and the effects, but clearly this would be a significant event requiring potentially substantial event organization. So once we get those further details, if we have your endorsement in principle for this to go further, we'd certainly come back. I would anticipate that I'm guessing there would be some budgetary implications, so we'd have to come back to Council with a further report on that. But we're just looking for your support in principle at this time to move this item further down the road.
Just a point of clarification, do Councillor Chong and I need to remove ourselves on this motion?
It's not the business.
Well, Your Worship, with that legal opinion, with an overabundance of caution, probably they should.
Then I will remove myself for a possible conflict of interest.
Both of the members of council sit on the West Shore Parks and Rec Board of Directors, and so that's the reason they're going away. So, conversation, council. Somebody prepared to make the recommendation as led by RCA?
I'd be prepared to make that recommendation.
Seconder?
I'll second that, Your Worship.
Any further discussion? Question? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Can you grab the parties in there then for me? It was a bad choice. We need Councillor Logan to lead. Item 6.2, Planning and Land Use Committee, 6.2.1. Councillor Logan, report Alan Haldenby, approving officer request for a deferral of parkland. You go for it? Are you doing that one?
6.1.2?
Yes. 6.6. Oh, pardon me. One more under there. Pardon me, folks. Back me up. Waterfront event. 6.1.2, Memorandum Communications Manager in regards to the Waterfront event update. Parks. Sandra?
Thank you. So in 2015 budget deliberations, council supported a budget for the Waterfront event. So subsequent to that, staff has put together an interdisciplinary working group to look at what this event might look like. So we've got planning, engineering, administration, and a member of council, plus public works on our committee. What we're proposing is a free one-day event on a Saturday or Sunday in September this year. And we're looking at themes that will focus on community, positive energy, our beautiful waterfront, and culture and history and art. We're looking at making this an all-inclusive and very fun event. Part of it is to build partnerships with community groups, so we would be looking at including groups of all kinds, including First Nations, our Coast Collective Arts Centre, West Shore Parks and Recreation, Colwood Rotary, West Shore Chamber of Commerce, Fort Red Hill, Royal Roads University, and a number of others to really bring the community together for this. It would also provide an opportunity to move forward with some other initiatives like an art installation down at the waterfront, and some other projects we want to move forward, including signage down at the waterfront. So what we're looking for is Colwood Council's support to move forward with planning for this event, working within the $10,000 budget that was allocated toward it.
Council?
I'll move the motion.
I'll second it. Discussion? Any idea what date that you're looking for?
The group had been looking at September 20th, a Sunday, but now that KRAFT Hockeyville is happening on the 21st, and some other things have come up, UBCM happens that week, we're looking at one or the other weekend on the either side of that. We have to have another conversation. So we have a meeting this week to nail that down.
Just for notation, I don't know what other events Fort Rod Hill might have in there, but they do have an English car fair,
Yep.
an ongoing event on the 13th of September. So
Yep.
that's usually fairly well attended and active and highly populated folks on that one.
Mm-hmm. And we've been looking at the benefits of tagging on to that, or
Yeah,
or
just
separating it.
so you know.
Yeah.
Councillor Day?
Thank you. I certainly support having a free community event. We did in 2008 have a really great event down at the Esquimalt Lagoon, and it's important to bring community groups together so that they can get to know one another better. So if we could open up to more groups, I think is better. If the English Car Club is there, let's get some other car clubs to come as well. We, when we celebrated the centennial for St. John's Church, we had a number of old car enthusiasts there helping us to celebrate, so it would be great to reconnect with some of those people.
Any other comments? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And now on to planning and land use, 6.2.1.
This first item, Your Worship, I'll have to defer to the approving officer.
Mr. Haldenby.
Thank you, Your Worship. With reference to the letter dated July 3rd attached to the staff report, Council is being asked this evening to consider a deferral of park dedication until later in the phasing of the development at 3476 Wishart. The Local Government Act contains provisions which allow for this under Section 941, but only if the developer and the city enter into a formal agreement which would specify exactly when the park will be dedicated in the future. And for this purpose, a draft parkland provision agreement has been attached to the staff report. The dates specified in that agreement have been discussed with the developer. Before proceeding any further, if I could draw your attention to the subject draft agreement circulated with the report, I want to correct a slight error. On page 2 of the agreement, paragraphs 2A and 2B have incorrect phase numbers in brackets following the area numbers. Area 2 is associated with phase 3 in paragraph 2A, not 4, and in paragraph 2B, it's vice versa. So, slight correction there. It should be noted, though the actual park dedications are allocated to the third and fourth phases of the development, there are a number of private open space areas to be established within the first two phases as well, which will be protected and maintained under registered covenants. These private open spaces will work together with the eventual dedication of public park to make up the requirement for a total of 40% of open space or green space in accordance with official community plan policy. Staff have no objection to the proposal and therefore recommend as follows: that the deferral of park dedications on the subject property be approved pursuant to subsection 941(9) of the Local Government Act, provided that A, the owner shall enter into a park land provision agreement with the City of Colwood specifying park dedication dates as follows. Phase 3, dedication of a minimum area of 0.28 hectares on or before December 31st, 2015. Secondly, in Phase 4, dedication of a minimum area of 1.51 hectares on or before December 31st, 2016. In B, I have a couple of slight amendments. It does read as security for performance of the park dedication requirements. The owner shall register a Section 219 Land Title Act covenant prohibiting building on lots within the first, second, and third phases. I wish to add fourth phase in there as well, so it should read the first, second, third, and fourth phases. And rather than subdivision, it should say development. Until such time as the park dedications are made in accordance with the terms of the Parkland Provision Agreement. Thirdly, if any of the lands included in the areas comprising phases 3 and 4 as shown on the open space and park dedication analysis map dated July 2nd, 2015 are subdivided prior to the specified dedication dates, the parkland dedications required by the agreement shall be made prior to final approval of such subdivision. And lastly, that the mayor and chief administrative officer be authorized to execute the subject parkland provision agreement on behalf of the City of Colwood. Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay. Council?
I didn't quite, I was looking for the page. I couldn't, so some of my questions may be answered by some of the amendments that you've made. But I'm not sure, because that was a bit quick for me to get to the page and hear what you were saying. So,
my apologies.
When I was reading through your report, it was unclear to me what is defined as open space. And in fact, in some, in the first phase, it looks as if the vertical rock walls that are currently being constructed are being considered open space as detailed on the map. And my concern with that is twofold. A, that rock wall does not, for me, make an open space that I find valuable. And B, I wonder if they're completely privately owned or if there is some liability being incurred by the city.
The term open space in terms of this particular site relate to private open space, and park dedications are public. So the light, if you look at the map that was supplied with the report, the lighter shade of green areas in lighter shade of green are the private open space areas. And primarily those are in the first two phases.
I believe those were just outlined in green as opposed to shaded green.
In the open space and park dedication analysis map that I have, and I think was attached to the report, there is a lightly shaded series of areas that constitute the private open space.
Alan, is that the map you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's on
Page
screen.
9 of our on-screen of
Page 9. I'm
9 of
looking at
14.
Page 14. There's the map. with parks shown with green outlines, and I didn't find another map. Oh, it's the same map again
Yeah, it
on
looks
page
like it's
9.
the same.
Yeah, it's exactly the same. Either way, I can kind of assume from the map that the smaller outlined areas are probably the open space, and the larger areas are probably the homes. So anyways, I found the map not easy to read, not easy to discern what was happening with those areas. The other question that came up at the Planning and Land Use Committee was, what happens if there are no houses built? What if the lots are developed and they're sold as building lots? Does that constitute completing the development to produce bare land lots?
Well, two different things. The subdivision is proposed to proceed for the first 2 phases prior to the dedication of park. But in conjunction with those first 2 phases, a covenant or covenants will be registered on the lots created that they will not be built on until the open spaces and parks are dedicated, at least the parks associated with that particular phase. One of the provisions in the draft agreement is the registration of a covenant or covenants, which will act as security, and essentially they will be no build covenants until the terms of the park provision agreement are met.
Okay, so now that all the trees have been cut down and we're basically looking at a rock slide, I think that the citizens of Colwood would like to see homes built there sooner rather than later, so that they're looking at gardens and houses rather than boulders and gravel. And we do also want them to dedicate parkland so that we retain that parkland. But it seems like we're guaranteeing that we get the parkland by ensuring that we're not going to get the houses that we want. So I find that a difficult trade-off. My other question is, Delora Drive on the map appears to connect to the neighboring property and homes. And I'm not sure why that is, that Delora Drive goes directly across the property.
This is related to the park dedications?
Well, because the maps are showing the park dedications and they're showing the roadways, so I'm trying to understand why the road is going across the property.
Simply to provide access to lands beyond.
Okay.
As part of the subdivision.
And the park dedication in phase 3 is pretty much a vertical park with no connection to Havenwood Park, looking at the topographical map. So I'm just curious why that's a park instead of an open space. In phase 3, it's a very steep slope.
Well, it could very well be open space instead of park, if that was council's wish. I understand that it is steep and probably unusable, so it is part of the natural space to be retained. And I believe there are some outcroppings there, rock outcroppings, that would be retained.
Mm-hmm.
So again, a natural park is the intent.
Okay. And other than not building homes in phase 1, is there any security given to assure that the phase 4 park dedication will occur, other than not building homes, no homes being built until the park is dedicated?
No. The ultimate security is the legal document itself. If the developer failed to dedicate the park at the appropriate time, then legal action could be taken through this agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Knoll?
Yes, I have some concerns with the draft agreement. particularly Article 6, where it says, for the purposes of purpose of prohibiting building on the lands. It doesn't say anything about blasting or clearing or bulldozing. It just says building. I would prefer that it was very specific that none of those lands be touched until such time as the parks were dedicated. I don't mind deferring it, but I don't want the parks bulldozed, clear-cut, and blasted. So can we change the agreement to reflect that?
Frankly, those are development permit issues and not subdivision issues. The subdivision issue relates to the registration of a Section 219 agreement for no building, and that is something that the approving officer can look at. I would prefer that the matters you cited be left as development permit issues.
Well, I don't have an awful lot of confidence then that we will get the parks exactly as they stand now under that situation, so I will not be supporting this deferment.
Other members of council? Councillor Day?
Thank you. I note that under communications, there has been no notification to the public about this proposal because it's assumed that the developer will eventually meet the park dedication requirements. I feel strongly that the public should be aware of our making a change in this way, because it could be a very different park that we get, or the site could change hands. Lots of things could happen. This would be a leap of faith, that I am unlikely to want to take, given that, as it says in the report, park dedications are normally triggered by the first phase of subdivision. So it's not unusual that parks would be dedicated up front. And my concern, there's no security being given. What's holding the feet to the fire is also something where we, as a city and as neighbors of the property, stand to lose from either way. Either the houses aren't built and we're looking at rock and gravel, or we get the park and or we don't get the park and the houses are allowed to be built. I can see that becoming a scenario in the future. And at this point in time, I don't have a lot of faith that the right-of-way for the appropriate road width on Wishart Road is being observed. So I will not be supporting this development to give us anything at a later date. I think that I would like to see some good faith, and I would like to see the parks dedicated sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Worship. Through you, Alan, could you just, clarify a couple of points? How the city benefits by deferring, and also I'm trying to rationalize the relationship to the park dedication to building houses. Is it to do something with the future phases and having 50% of the lots built out before we allow future construction? I'm just trying to rationalize some of Cynthia's comments.
I'll answer the second question first, maybe. No, there is no relation to the policy of 50% completion before. This is simply, the no-build covenants are simply suggested as more an incentive for the developer than anything else. The feet to the fire is really the legal recourse that the municipality would have if the dates in the agreement are not met. The city could take action and compel through a court the developer to dedicate the parkland. There's no question of that.
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to rationalize in my head what benefit it would be for the city to delay as opposed to request the dedication now. Like, is it a maintenance issue or access, or why would we want to delay it?
essentially, it's uncertain as to exactly where the boundaries will go until the developer has an opportunity to plan out those Phase 3 and Phase 4 areas, so that you may be faced with one or more changes to a legal plan in the future to alter the boundaries. And I'm not talking about significant boundaries, because they must dedicate part substantially in accordance with the plan that has been circulated. But there may be minor changes that have to be reflected quite concisely on a legal plan, and that may be in flux until they actually do their detailed planning in those phase areas.
Okay, so there's no certainty in terms of where the boundaries are for the parks until they go in and do some more detailed
They're
planning,
very
is what you're saying.
approximate right now.
Okay, thank you.
But we will ensure that the areas are protected.
Anybody else? We need to.
I'll move the motion as presented.
Second.
Further discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? 3 opposed, 4 on. Motion is carried. Item 6.2.2, this is a late item that was entered into our systems, folks, so I'm hoping that I'm reading it from the right one, because I know we had a little bit of trouble loading it up on our iPads. 6.2.2, a application DVP 1510318 Whale Road Holiday Inn. Councillor Logan?
Thank you, Worship. Well, we're all very excited that the hotel is nearing completion and ready to open in November. Moving along those lines, the applicant is requesting to amend Section 12, subsection D, or Section D, subsection 2 of the sign bylaw in order to permit the erection of 3 overheight Holiday Inn Express and Suites fascia signs for the new hotel, currently under construction. The variances requested are to increase the maximum allowable height of 1 fascia sign on the north elevation from 1.2 meters to 3.4, increase the maximum allowable height of 1 fascia sign on the east elevation from 1.2 to 4.2 meters, and increase the maximum allowable height of 1 fascia sign on the south elevation from 1.2 to 2.55 meters. The members of our committee assume that the size of the sign complies with hotel policy, and we agreed that the signage is important for the type of business and commercial location, and that it is important that the sign needs to be visible to the public. And looking at the plans that were presented, it was certainly the size of the signs were in keeping with the scale of the building, and the committee felt it was acceptable. Therefore, it was recommended by committee, and I so move, that the development variance permit number DVP 15-010 be authorized for issuance, which would have the effect of varying the maximum allowable height of a fascia sign pursuant to Section 12, Section D, subsection 2 of the sign bylaw number 60 from 1.2, etc. I won't read out the whole recommendation, Your Worship, and I will so move it.
Seconder, please. Discussion? Called, yes? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. 6.2.3, recommendation, zoning text amendment, RZ 15002, and revisions to the existing development agreement, 3221 Heatherbell Road.
Thank you, Worship. In this application, the applicant is requesting changes to the text of the Comprehensive Development 15, CD15 zone, within the land use bylaw to permit the prorating of lump sum amenity contributions over the course of the development on a per unit basis, and adding a $2,000 per unit affordable housing contribution as an alternate means of addressing housing affordability. The applicant has also applied to amend the existing development agreement by proposing changes to the offsite works, environmental oversight, and building design, and by deleting the attainable housing provisions in the development agreement. The applicant intends to proceed with the initial concept, that they are not asking for any density or use changes to the existing zoning, and that the reason for the request is to help make the development more financially viable. It was recommended by, it was also noted actually by committee that this site was actually rezoned in 2009 and no development has occurred to date, and that commercial use is included in the zoning. And furthermore, that the city has benefited by collecting increased taxes since 2009 with no incurred costs, and that the amenity contributions are considered a bonus to the city as development progresses. It's a lengthy recommendation, Your Worship, that I will not read out, but it was recommended by committee, and I so move the recommendation before us.
Seconder?
Second.
Discussion, Council? Councillor Day?
Thank you. And unfortunately, as much as this developer has been a very good force for positive things in our community, the Coast Collective and community gardens, and bringing a lot of promises forward back in 2009 to try to deal with the issues that were of concern to both the public and council at the time, including transit service and affordable housing. And it would appear to me that many, if not all, of those things are here today on the chopping block. Instead of having a privately run shuttle bus service in conjunction with a hotel, we are putting in 2 transit shelters to a location that BC Transit does not currently go to, on a route where BC Transit has recently cut the service by half, coming once per hour to an area that is a considerable hike if you want to get to transit. And I have concerns with, I know they're working with an excellent aquatic biologist. I know that they're planning to rehabilitate the aquatic biology to maintain Bee Creek, which has had a great deal of attention over the last 20 years by some very dedicated volunteers. But what happens if this, and all developments are high risk, so I'm not trying to single out this one, but what if this high risk venture runs into difficulties and ends up on hold for a long period of time? We will have given up a beautiful pond created by some very fabulous gardeners back in the 1920s, the same ones who built the landscapes at the McClure Mansions in town and at Royal Roads at the Hatley Castle, and replace that with a hole in the ground, potentially filling up with water because it will be below sea level. It takes a leap of faith to believe that that's all possible. Even given, you know, that we're trying to, we're already at the beginning of this process, and since 2009 we're just looking at backtracking on the costs that are envisioned to bring this to reality. So I just am not feeling confident. I'm not feeling secure that we are not giving up something beautiful for what will eventually be not even maybe what we're looking at on the plans here today.
Thank you. Just a couple of points. If I remember correctly, the original plan was to develop the whole site all at once. And with this plan, what it does is it breaks it down into phases. So the whole site isn't leveled all at once, but is chunked out in manageable sizes. For instance, the first phase of, I think it's 33 properties or 33 doors. So the whole site isn't developed all at once. It's done in manageable bite-sized pieces. And I mean, realistically, the climate has changed since the property was rezoned, and so it doesn't make it worthwhile to go out and develop the site unless there is interest. Certainly from a city's point of view, I think it's probably desirable that the site is developed quickly, but the fact that we are allowing it to be done in a phased fashion preserves as much of the site as long as possible. Something else to point out here, with the changes to the contributions, the city is actually further ahead financially by having increased contributions. And the one thing that really stands out for me, quite frankly, is that, the residents in the neighborhood have demanded that sidewalks get constructed early on in any development stage. And this one says that right up front, that a 2-meter wide concrete sidewalk will be constructed on Heather Bell Road from their lands right up to the property at 295 Portsmouth, which, is a statement that they've been listening to the neighborhood, and that was one of the prime concerns that council had as well, is if we're developing, we need to get that type of infrastructure in there first. So, I know this has changed, and certainly I understand some of the concerns about the shuttle bus and some of the affordable housing, but realistically, I'm not sure that we or the developer, it would be realistic to have that kind of service. And furthermore, in terms of affordable housing, that would mean another burden on the municipality in terms of having to administer such an agreement. Not to say it's not worthwhile, but it does bring some costs, additional costs to the taxpayer too. So I think in this climate that what's being envisioned here is reasonable, and it actually benefits the community and the taxpayer a bit more than the previous agreement. Thank you.
Councillor Trace?
I particularly have concerns with respect to access to Heather Bell off Lagoon with the increased traffic. I feel it's a real blind turn there, particularly with the hedges from 295 Lagoon Road and 303 Lagoon Road, coming down that hill and making a left-hand turn onto Heather Bell. The cars don't have the vision of the cars coming onwards up the hill. And as you're proceeding down to make your left-hand turn onto Heather Bell, there are moments where you think you can turn, and all of a sudden there's a car coming because you reach the point of vision, and then you have to stop suddenly, and a car behind you can easily rear-end you. Although I do support the concept of this development, I do feel that there should be more safety measures taken with respect to the turn from Lagoon onto Heather Bell, particularly with increased traffic.
City engineer, is there any update on that corner? It had been up in discussion on another project as well for visibility in and out of driveways and exactly that left-hand turn.
Well, we've cut the hedge back a bit, and we may have to cut it back a bit more. We have got some more visibility. There were one of the developers is required to put rumble strips, but the ultimate improvement that has been suggested to me is a left-hand turn lane. Unfortunately, there's some issues there with a CRD water pump station in the way of expanding the width of the road, which obviously you'd have to do to get a left-hand turn. And on the other side, if we expand it the other way, we would actually be cutting into a driveway that's fairly steep down, and it would be made even steeper. And we'd also probably make the visibility issue worse. So this would need quite a bit of engineering work to come up with a solution, given these the tightness of these issues, and the cost would be substantial.
Would it be a candidate for a roundabout?
There's nowhere near enough land there, and it's too steep. I mean, that's something that could be looked at, but I think it would be really hard to pull off there.
Any other members of council? We have the recommendation before us. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? I'd count again on this side. I didn't. Four? Okay. Motion carries. 6.2.4 recommendation development variance permit DVP 15007 3476 Wishart Road. Councillor Logan.
Thank you, Worship. In this application, the applicant is requesting to vary section 10.27.5 of the land use bylaw number 151 by reducing the minimum required lot frontage from 16 meters to 12 meters, reducing the minimum required lot width from 16 meters to 12 meters, reducing the minimum front yard setback for principal buildings from 6 meters to 4.5 meters, excluding the garage portion, and is seeking approval from council to be allowed to start site clearing of subsequent construction in the next phase of the development, allowing the development of the entire site despite being limited by a phase-by-phase approach outlined in the development agreement at the time of the Comprehensive Development 22 zone. We had a fair amount of discussion at the committee. It was recognized that during the rezoning process there was an expectation that some variances would come forward, and we had a substantial discussion regarding the phasing request that the developer had proposed. And as council's probably aware, this project, the rezoning for this project came forward on the heels of another project on Latoria Road that was left quite barren. So council was quite sensitive to that fact and had put in the requirement for the phasing. Given that it's only about 6 months since that agreement was ratified, the committee was quite hesitant to lift that restriction at this point. We're quite happy with the pace of their servicing for sure, but that they need to demonstrate that they're committed and they will continue building. So we weren't quite prepared to let them off the hook on the phasing aspect. It was therefore it was recommended by committee, and I so move the recommendation before us, which is the sought-out variances and denying the request to allow the clearing of all land and the clearing of land in all phases outside of Phase 1 prior to construction.
Seconder, please.
Second.
Discussion, council. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I realize that these are draft minutes, but perhaps staff could note that I did speak up as to my reasons for opposing this at the Planning and Land Use Committee meeting. So the minutes don't show that I was opposed to this. And my reasons for being opposed to it are twofold. First of all, there was considerable discussion from the neighbors along Delora regarding the side yard setbacks and the front yard setbacks. And, sorry, it was actually the lot width, sorry, not the side yard setbacks. That was the next item. So it was the desire of the majority of the neighbors that I knew were neighbors who spoke up saying they would like to see more green space and less house, and there was considerable discussion about that. And there was also considerable discussion about the boulders that have been placed at the base of the retaining wall closest to Wishart Road, which appear to encroach on into the area that is needed for proper road width there. And perhaps staff could give us an update where we are at with that.
So the retaining wall as it sits doesn't encroach into the existing road right-of-way, but that is a very narrow point of road right-of-way there, and the developer is aware that in order to fulfill the requirements of the subdivision and development servicing bylaw, some right-of-way would have to be dedicated to allow that width of construction. they're in the process of applying for development variance permit to build a narrower road, which we will be supporting with some advantages in wider sidewalks and bike lanes, which are not required in the bylaw. So there'd be a trade-off, a narrow road right-of-way, but a better facility within that road right-of-way. And to build the facility that we think is minimum, then the wall would definitely impinge on that. So we have informed the developer, and we're sending a letter in the morning just to make sure that everything is crystal clear.
Thank you. And so with I'm pleased that the committee agreed that the first phase should be completed before other phases were started. But I cannot support the minimum lot widths and the front yard setback relaxations.
Anyone else from Councillor? Councillor Arnold?
I would have to agree with that. The residents spoke very clearly that they were afraid you were going to see, quote, large homes on small lots with no front yards, a neighborhood with little or no green space and no frontage. So I tend to agree with that. We have all of those setbacks in our bylaws for very good reasons, and to vary them for this site, I think, will result in a much less livable site. So I will not support the variances, but I would support the denying the clearing in all phases. So I was wondering if I could make a request that we vote on the two parts, the two recommendations as separate motions.
What's the wish of council? Do you want to split it? I have no objection. No objection. So we'll split those two, then one dealing with variances, and the second motion will be a subsequent one to deny the phasing. Any further discussion or questions? On the first motion, then, the first part, which will be A, B, and C, with the variances, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. On the second one, that council deny the request to allow the clearing of land in all phases outside of phase one prior to the construction of phase one being 50% complete. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Thank you, folks. Moving on, 6.2.5, recommendation development variance permit application DVP 15008 Royal Bay phases 1 and 1A.
Thank you, Worship. The application here has been made to facilitate the development of a 113-lot residential subdivision, Phase 1 and 1A, as part of the comprehensive development of the Royal Bay lands. The applicant is requesting variances increasing in the allowable height for a single-family dwelling from 8.5 meters to 9.25 meters for all single-family dwellings within Phase 1 and 1A, and reduce the minimum flanking street setback for single-family dwellings to match the regular side yard setbacks requirement for Phase 1 and 1A. Essentially, Your Worship, it's just taking advantage of some of the sloping lands, and committee was satisfied that it would not have a negative effect on the development. It was recommended, and I so move the recommendation before us.
Including subject twos.
Including the subject twos, yes.
Seconder, please. Discussion? I'm going to start this side. Anybody on this end? Councillor Day.
Thanks. I've been researching this a little bit because height issues have been big in Colwood, and they've been different in some areas than others. They've been difficult down at Esquimalt Lagoon. They've been difficult on Triangle Mountain, where there have been slightly different ways of calculating the height of homes on lots. And my concern around them, just to put it, for me, I needed to put it in perspective. I can't think real well in meters. I guess I'm getting old. But 8.5 meters is 27 feet, 10 inches tall. 9.25 meters is 30 feet, 4 inches tall. So it's a considerable difference. And as I read it, and perhaps staff can correct me if I'm wrong, this variance would allow all houses that are on sloping lots to be 3 stories tall. They would be able to have a walkout basement and then 2 stories above. And what I can't quite figure out is how this will be measured. It's been problematic for us figuring out how it would be measured because it used to be the average, and then what if they changed the configuration of the lot? And the report says that we're measuring from the road level. And I just have found that the more I thought about it, the more confused I felt about being able to say to a neighbor, who might move into this neighborhood, and there's an empty lot beside them, how tall will that house be that's going to be beside you or in front of you, and perhaps in your little tiny view corridor. And the other issue that I have is that in my old paperwork, according to the Master Development Agreement, Phase 1 and 1A are complete. And if this area is actually Phase 2, which is how it would be under the Master Development Agreement, then that might allow for continued industrial use in a residential area, because there were different triggers for when different uses were no longer allowed in Royal Bay. So maybe staff could address that.
Your Worship, just to clarify, is there initial question regarding the clarification of how height is measured, and then also about the Master Development Agreement? Is that correct?
Yes, about whether the phases are named correctly and whether that will affect industrial use adjacent to residential use.
The phasing nomenclature that's mentioned in this development variance application references the subdivision plan that has been undertaken with the new development, the owners of the development. The previous master development permit referenced an old phasing plan that hasn't been carried forth with the subdivision plan. Right now, staff, through our due diligence on a text amendment rezoning application, are reviewing that master development agreement, and we'll bring forward to council any work that needs to be done in terms of aligning that master development agreement with additional Section 219 covenants or additional development permits. But at this stage, we do not see any conflict between the previous development permit, master development permit phasing numbers, and the new subdivision phasing that's currently being applied.
And just how the height is measured then? Because this references the road, and I don't believe we've ever referenced the road in our height formulas ever.
The height of a building, it is a complex calculation, but it's essentially measured from the average natural grade of the perimeter of the building to the median height of a roof. So what that means, or excuse me, it's the mean height of a roof. So if you've got a pitched roof, you're allowed to go to what would be the mean height, so the average height of that pitched roof. So it could technically go a bit over 8.5 if you have a sloped roof. That's essentially how normal height is measured. The condition that's suggested here by staff would be simply to provide the form and character that would, we believe is the intent of this area, that there's 2-story single-family dwellings as seen from the street. essentially.
Just to follow up on that, so is this the way you're going to describe height from now on? Is everyone like? How do you know which street? Right? Is it your front street or the street at the back, or like? Because I'm trying to think what the implications are for a much. This is a small part of a much bigger development.
The recommended condition references the front property line, and this condition is only applying to the Royal Bay development in this case. What I tried to explain in terms of how height is measured comes directly from the land use bylaw, as opposed to a zone-specific calculation.
Okay. Councillor Logan?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the Director. So is it fair to say if the land was flat, dead flat, that these height variances wouldn't be requested? But because there is a slope, the view from the street, the front street, is going to be no different. But in the back, where there's a lane, so that's the difference between a street and a lane, the back lane, that's where you'll see, that's why we need a bit of a height variance, because of the sloping land as seen from the rear lane. So it looks taller, but really from the front of it,
I think that's a fair assessment.
Thanks.
A question to you, staff, is in the meeting there, it was identified that the height variance would cover off in all of the phase, but there would only be a limited number of buildings that would actually take advantage, if you will, of that. Any idea of how many that actually counts within the subdivision?
Staff haven't been provided with plans such that we could make a accurate estimate of how many houses in Phase 1 would take advantage of this. If there was a flat lot, it would be impossible for the developer to have to meet this condition and still achieve that 9.25 meter height. This phase we're talking about is quite a bit of it is sloped. Mm-hmm. So I would hazard a guess that quite a few of the units in this phase could take advantage of the sloping lots. But we have had discussions about this with the developer, and apologies, it escapes me exactly what they've said about an estimate for how many would be actually taking advantage of this.
I looked back in the report, I couldn't find anything either. That's the question. Any further questions? Councillor Knoll?
Just for a matter of clarity, we're voting to allow the minimum flanking street setback to match the regular side yard setback. Can you explain exactly what those setbacks are required from a flanking street and a side yard? It seems to me that it's as small as 1 meter, and that seems to be awfully close to a flanking street.
Just to clarify, the concern is with the 1 meter setback from a flanking street, potentially?
I'm just wondering what the current requirements are and what the regular side yard setbacks are, because they're not spelled out in the report or the motion.
When the report that went to the committee on page, I think 4, it shows that in those two zones, the current flanking street setbacks are, it depends on the size of the lots. So 7.5 meters, 6 meters, 6 meters, and 3 meters. The proposed would change for all those lots to 3 meters, 3 meters, 1.5, and 1.
Follow up? Good.
Madam Mayor, just on reflection, looking at the recommendation as it's written, in the council agenda. Might I suggest that council consider making reference to the condition being directly related to item C, which is the height variance, just for clarity's sake in this development variance permit. Oh, and excuse me, A as well. So A and C.
Sorry, I don't quite understand.
Now I'm lost on there.
Sorry. So the variances that are being sought in the recommendation, so it's A through D, only A and C are with respect to height. And so the way the recommendation is written, the subject to would apply to all A, B, C, and D. I think it would be best to specify that condition is only applicable to the variances for height under A and C.
And the subject to stay the same?
Yes, please.
Okay. Any further discussion? You're confused. You need
I
an
have
answer.
no idea what that motion is. I'm sorry, I don't get it. I'm just thick tonight or something.
The variances being sought include variances for height and setbacks. Currently, the recommended condition under the subject to that the structures be no higher than 8.5 meters as measured from the average elevation of the front property line. The way it's written, it could be interpreted that condition would apply for all of the variances, including the setback variances. So just as a point of clarification, I think that it'd be best to specify that subject to only applies to the height variances, not the setback variances.
Gotcha. That's clear.
Fine now? So with that clarification in there, any further discussion? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. 6.2.6, report Director of Planning. Omnibus amendment to land use bylaw number 151, bylaw number 1590.
Thank you, Your Worship. On June 1st, 2015, Council directed staff to undertake the drafting of a series of housekeeping amendments to land use bylaw number 151. The staff report and associated draft omnibus bylaw number 1590 before you this evening on page 85 to 94 of the agenda package is presented in response to this direction. As a point of clarification, the staff recommendation in this report to give first and second readings to the proposed omnibus bylaw is applicable later in tonight's meeting agenda when bylaw number 1590 is presented for initial readings. At this point, staff recommend that Council simply receive the staff report and give consideration to the proposed draft bylaw ahead of returning to it later this evening in section 7.6 of the agenda. The purpose of the proposed omnibus bylaw is twofold. Firstly, to make improvements to the zoning regulations concerning assembly, civic, institutional, and other related land uses in light of recent British Columbia case law. These precedents include a 2014 BC Court of Appeal ruling that opens the door to very broad interpretations of what could be permitted under the definitions of institutional zoning, as well as a 2006 ruling by the Appeal Court that confirmed that it is beyond the power of municipalities to make distinctions between public and private entities in zoning regulations. This is based on the fact that enabling legislation gives local governments the ability to regulate uses, but not user groups via zoning bylaws. The second purpose of the proposed omnibus bylaw is to clarify and make general improvements to the rules concerning other uses, including those associated with schools, daycares, boarders or lodgers in commercial, institutional, and residential zones. To achieve these overarching goals, the proposed omnibus amendment would make the following changes. Firstly, removal of references to users in several areas, including the definitions of affordable housing, church, and public utility use. Replacement of the existing references to assembly use with a standalone land use that provides much greater certainty to what that would permit. Revision of the definition of civic use to once again provide better clarity and certainty to how it would be applied. Updating of section 2.1.01, which contains the off-street parking requirements to reflect the revised land use designations. harmonization of the provisions concerning maximum number of boarders and lodgers so that consistent restrictions are applied across all zones, consolidation of the definitions of various dwelling types so that restrictions on the maximum number of unrelated persons living with boarders and lodgers in a single dwelling are applied consistently across different types of dwellings. Deletion of private clubs and lodges as a standalone permitted use, as it's been determined that this is a potentially land use that could be potentially interpreted very broadly and potentially allow conflicting land uses to occur. And lastly, the addition of child daycare to the list of permitted uses in the P1 neighborhood and institutional zone to align it with other institutional zones, such as the community institutional or P2 zone. Staff expect that these changes would greatly improve the clarity and enforceability of zoning regulations and thereby reduce the potential for land use related conflicts and the costs associated with the administration of land use bylaw. Therefore, staff recommend that council receive the staff report and give consideration to Omnibus Bylaw 1590 prior to your opportunity to give it first and second readings later this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Move to receive.
Question?
Just in regards to the philanthropic uses, I'm just wondering if there is precedent that is a defensible name to give to the use of a building, so that people couldn't simply say, they put out a donation jar so they can do anything they want.
Staff worked closely with the municipal solicitors in the developing of this bylaw, and that was an issue that was discussed. And through our due diligence on it, we feel that it is a defensible wording for that proposed use.
Anyone else? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on into Finance and Admin 6.3.1. Municipal Bylaw Enforcement Officer Unsightly Premises at 554 Giroux Road.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's some slightly premise file with respect to 554 Giroux Road. Quick summary: complaint was received on May 22nd with respect to the property. On the 29th, Officer Atkinson attended and found that it was unsightly and quite overgrown, which is illustrated in the attached photographs to the report. That same day, a letter went out to the homeowner explaining that the property was in contravention of our unsightly premise bylaw, and also articulated a timeline for compliance and expectations for compliance, and also detailing that they had until today to get the property cleaned up, and then the matter would come forward to council for consideration. There was also an interim contact with the homeowner's son who lives at the address, and was also advised verbally at that time of the timeline for compliance. I did attend the property today to see if there had been any improvement. There's an additional set of photographs that I believe have been handed out. I could not see any improvement. In fact, it looked worse. Just to give you a little bit of scope, on page 2 of the new photographs, you'll see at the bottom of the page a picture of some blackberry bushes and a slide. I broke out my tape measure to get an idea just how tall these were, and they were over 9 feet high, and that's pushing against the fence along the rear property line. So options in accordance with unsightly premises bylaw. We can direct the owner to remove the overgrown tall grass, blackberries, thistles, etc. from the premises within 14 days of a delivery of notification letter. And of course, failure to comply will result in the city or its agents doing the work at the owner's expense. Our second option is, of course, that council direct bylaw enforcement staff to take no action on this property. The financial considerations, if the city does take on the cleanup after those 14 days, if the improvement hasn't been made, it'll come at a cost of approximately $1,600 to $3,000. Of course, these costs will be billed, and if unpaid after December 31st, the balance will be added to the property taxes in arrears. Bylaw enforcement's recommendation is that council, pursuant to the unsightly premises bylaw, do in fact direct the owner of 554 Guru Road to remove the overgrown grass, tall grass, blackberries, and the debris that is on site. And then within 14 days of delivery of a notification letter, that the removal of the growth be taken forth by the city or its agents. Any questions at all?
Move the recommendation, Your Worship.
Discussion, council. Any questions to bylaw? Mr. Williams, is there any known hardship or predisposing reasons on this? What was the demeanor of
There's none noted in the file, and I spoke with Officer Atkinson, and he's not aware of any extraordinary circumstances with respect to this property. And as far as I know, the property owner hasn't shown up here today to claim any such hardship.
And beyond the tall grass and blackberries and all of that debris and that sort of thing, which in this heightened drought risk time, even though they're showing reasonable green in the photos, it is concerning, both to the city overall and the neighbors in the adjacent area. What about the oil tank? I noticed in the original report there's considerable discoloration that
there is an oil
appears
tank
to
on
be rough.
site that is showing some rust. I'm not aware of any issues with respect to that. That would probably require a building inspector to go and examine that. At the moment, we're just concerned with the growth and the debris that's on site.
I mean, it may not even be in use. I'm not sure. Councillor Martin?
Have we done any look into, do they have a legal suite? Do you know?
I'm not aware that one has been reported, and I'm not aware of a file that's been opened with respect to that. I can check with Officer Smith. He has that portfolio.
The only reason I ask is I'm on Google Earth right now, and there's obviously 2 entrances to the house, and I've counted 5 vehicles on the day that Google Earth drew by. So now maybe they had visitors that day. So
possibly when I attended today, there was one unlicensed vehicle and another vehicle parked in the driveway. So, and that being said, with regard to entrances, it's so overgrown, it's actually really hard to get around the property fully. It's some of the back parts are completely blocked.
Any further questions? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed?
Thank you.
Recommendation is made, confirmed. 6.3.2, report Acting Director of Finance, year-to-date actual to budget financial report with variance analysis. Ms. Andrea?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. This report is being brought forward for Council's information because we do spend an awful lot of time in the early part of the year on budget, and then we grind our way through the financial statements, and then it's property tax time. And when the finance staff comes to about the 2nd of July, we realize that we need to get some financial information to Council. What you have here tonight is a high-level report. What I can tell you at this time of the year is our revenues generally are running ahead of budget because we've now collected all of our property tax revenue kind of all at once, the majority of it, and our sewer parcel tax revenues have all been collected. We have some billing yet to do on our PILTs, which is about $2 million. And at the end of the day, I've given you a bit of an analysis on the revenue in the report. I won't read it all out, but I think it's fairly self-explanatory. The flip side of this is our expenses, which at time of the year tend to run under budget. There is still a great deal of work that needs to be done in terms of our special projects and our tangible capital asset expenditures. We're running between 10% and 25% of what we've budgeted for those items, and that's where some of our big ticket monies are. I will be discussing this with our managers tomorrow, just to remind everyone now to have a look at their financial reports and to help us out by comparing actual to budget, and if they can spot anything that we need to have a look at. We recently signed a interim lease. This is lease number 2, a progress payment on the new fire department snorkel truck, which, as you may recall from budget, is $1.7 million. And we've initially put a 10% deposit down. We've just signed a lease for just over another $1 million. And this represents payment toward the aerial portion and the chassis. So that project is definitely proceeding as planned, and the fire department folks tell me that we're hoping to expect delivery of that in about October. So that's a big project. So that is a chunk of the lease payments that we budgeted for that are now starting to kick in. So basically, I'm giving this to you for your information, and I don't have any other further comments unless council has some questions.
Thank you. I'd like to look just, so if we're looking at the expenses, so if we go to the expense one, I'm just comparing actual 2014 to actual 2015, and I'm assuming the actual 2014 is year to date as
Correct.
of that too. So can you please explain the first one, general governance? In 2014, we were budgeted at 3.9 million, and to this point last year, we spent 840. We've decreased that by 800,000, but we're over 1.6, 1.8 million this year spending, and so we're almost double what we spent this time last year. And so I'm just curious why.
Yeah, and I would actually have to look into that. I can't speak to those details at this point. I know that there was some things to do with Solar Colwood that we shifted around from last year to this year, for example. But I would have to take that question offline and have a look at that, because I know we have shown some figures differently, whether it was creating separate accounts, and also I'm just looking at the actual 2014 to 2015. Yeah, I can't tell you based on this high-level review,
Okay.
but if you like, I can send out an email to you and copy it to council.
That'd be great, because I guess there's just a couple that jump out at me.
Yep.
That one, engineering and transportation, we're close to $500,000 more this time compared to this time last year.
Okay.
And you know, we're close to 65% of our spending for the fiscal year.
That's what's remaining. That's not,
what's remaining.
That's what's remaining. If you look at that
All right.
column,
Yeah. Okay. Got
we're
it.
actually in very good shape
Yeah.
there.
Yes, we are. You are correct. So those are the only ones that were really standing out for me.
Okay, sure. I'll have a look because of the way some of the account groupings were changed. Okay.
Sorry, may I just ask one more?
Yeah, you can ask one more.
So, sorry, under protective services, and it could be my eyes, is budget for 2014 5.4 million, or is that 3.4 million? I can't tell with on the paper.
5.4.
Is it 5.4? Okay, so it's close. Thank you. It looked to me like it was 3.4. I was like, geez. Spending $2 million more this year.
We're not wanting to give you cardiac arrest.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is a recommendation here, folks, to receive.
So moved.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Next item is 6.3.3, CAO report regarding principal outcomes from the strategic priorities and project planning workshop held May 20th.
Thank you, Your Worship. My report is on page 105 of the agenda. It's fairly lengthy, and I'll basically just hit the high points at this point in time. First off, I'd just like to thank Council and the staff for their interest and engagement in this process. What this report essentially is doing is reporting out on your strategic priorities project planning workshop, which was held in May, and in fact you also held an initial session in January. In the report, I outlined the process and the homework that was done leading up to the workshop starting in January. I've set out the objectives of the May workshop and also tried to outline the approach and the process which the facilitator, Tracy Lawrenson, did use at the workshop. In the report, I've identified a number of projects where it appeared to be consensus on the part of Council to remove certain projects from the work plan. Appendix A attached to the report is essentially the list of projects that staff put together. It was a collaborative process. Strategic priority projects, major projects, and also previous referrals to staff. Appendix A is the document that was actually utilized at the session. You'll remember that. Appendix B is Tracy Lawrenson's report on the workshop. Previously, you were given the raw data, but she has followed up with a more comprehensive narrative report as well as better pictorial renderings of the various bar graphs. In the discussion section of my report, I outline the considerations that staff have taken into account subsequent to the workshop in coming up with Appendix C, which is really the principal reporting document that I've utilized and is the sort of the penultimate outcome of this particular process. We in coming up with this prioritized ranking, the prioritized ranking of the various projects which came out of the 20th and 21st of May workshop, we looked at that carefully with the objective of eliminating or minimizing any inconsistencies between staff's list and Council's desired prioritization. That was the primary consideration. I'll talk about that just a little bit more in a minute. We also considered the staff and budgetary resources available to undertake the various projects, either utilizing external consulting resources or in-house resources. We also considered the current workload across all city departments, which is required to essentially perform the core services. And you got to remember, and I said this at the workshop, that the core services are 80% at least of what we typically do. We also considered any particular unique staffing situations or challenges which could potentially detract from the successful delivery of these particular projects. And at the end of the day, we've attempted to be realistic and honest in terms of the city's ability and what it's capable of delivering given other competing priorities and the level of resources available. So this is the document, really, which is the substance of my recommendations. And just a couple of observations I want to bring to your attention. We used to have, or Colwood used to have, or currently has 3 strategic goals. As a result of the session, and Tracy did introduce this at the workshop, we've now come up with 4 strategic goals and categorized the projects by department into each one of these 4 strategic goals. The second thing I want to bring to your attention is that we really took a close look, and certainly I did, of the prioritized ranking of all of these various projects. And again, to the fullest extent possible, we feel pretty confident that it reflects the prioritization that came out of the session, with one perhaps notable exception that I want to raise. And the planning director may wish to weigh in on this. You'll note that under well-planned economic and community growth, under planning, the strategic priority, we are indicating 2 of them, the OCP review and the land use bylaw update. If you look at the rankings that came out of the workshop, the OCP review was it was lower in the list, so you may question, well, why have they elevated that to a strategic priority? And as you know, we're having a lot of challenges with things like retaining walls, the hillside shoreline design guidelines. Even in the brief time that I've been here, there's a number of issues that's come up with respect to these types of issues, and this goes back to the soundness of the official community plan. So we've had a lot of internal discussion, the planning department and myself, and we do feel that the number one priority really, and going into this, we probably thought that the OCP review could wait a little bit longer, but we really do feel that this needs to be elevated to a 2015-16 strategic priority with a view to starting the process. It's not going to be done entirely this year, but at least starting it this year. There may be some budgetary implications that we'll have to come forward with in 2016, but that will be through the appropriate process. But with the exception of the OCP review, and the planning director may wish to comment on this if there's any questions, we feel that this does pretty closely reflect, we hope, the prioritization that came out of the session. So in terms of recommendations, what we're looking for at this point in time is really council's endorsement of these projects. Basically, I have 4 recommendations: that you afford any members of the public in attendance the opportunity to comment, that subject to any comments from the public which may be received, you endorse and confirm the project's prioritization and timelines, which we've set out in this document. And then, if council's comfortable with that, we will proceed to post this material, including this report, on the website, and that then appropriate strategies be now undertaken to communicate these priorities to staff and to the community at large through updating or revision as required of to Colwood's various strategic planning and project priorities documents. So it's kind of over to Sandra in that regard. And then the fourth is that you direct staff be directed to use the adopted list, which is set out in this appendix, as the basis for updating our respective departmental work plans and project planning, timeframe setting, and progress reporting documents, Your Worship. Thank you.
Thank you. Mover and a shaker, please.
Move the recommendation, Your Worship.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. And with that, for those members of the public that are here, if you would like to provide comment in regards to this report, we'd be welcome to have you engage. Mr. Vintzer? Not at all.
My name is John Vintzer. I live at 3340 Painter Road. I'm just looking at your plan as your strategic goals. The one here I had had a question on, actually, more than a comment. Hire an economic development officer in 2015. I just wondered what the duties of this economic development officer would be, what gap it's filling that you don't have the capability right now, and do you have an approximate budget for that person?
Your Worship, it's a timely question because it's actually coming up later on the agenda. The draft job description is in the agenda package, and it was a position that was earmarked in this year's budget for the creation of this new position in 2015. It has not been filled as yet. We need council's endorsement to proceed with it. There's actually a series of recommendations tonight in that regard coming through the Economic Development Committee. I can't speak to the precise budgetary figure.
I can give you a rough figure. It was budgeted to start halfway through the year, so we budgeted for 6 months at approximately $45,000 for the 6-month period.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the folks in the audience? Seeing none, you'll hear more on that question that you've asked, John, and from there, but we can move on from this one then to the next item. Transportation and Public Infrastructure Committee recommendation, request for relaxation of bylaw number 38, Colwood Noise Bylaw in 1968 for CRD water main upgrade at Souk Road and Jacqueline Road intersection.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Quite simply, this is the city stuck between a rock and a hard place. CRD Water wants to upgrade the water main at Souk and Jacqueline. We have two options. We can relax the noise bylaw and let them do the work at night, which will inconvenience a few residents for a few days in close proximity, or we can force them to do the work during the day, which will back traffic up probably all the way to Port Renfrew. So committee discussed this and recommended to council, and I would so move that council approve Stantec's request for relaxation of Colwood's noise bylaw number 38 and the relaxation of hours of work to allow for night work between the hours of 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. on Souk Road and Jacqueline Road for the proposed dates of July 27 to 31st, 2015, with the flexibility to change the dates if necessary due to construction delay or complications of the water main project.
Discussion, council? Question, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Next item, 6.4.2, recommendation proposals for age-friendly plan 2015.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The city received a strings-free grant to work on a age-friendly plan 2015. We put it out to request for proposals and bids. Barefoot Planning had a bid within the $20,000 grant limit. There's no financial benefit to the city to award the contract to a lower cost consultant, and staff believes there's qualitative benefit to the finished product in awarding it to the chosen consultant. So it's recommended to council that council approves the awarding of the age-friendly plan 2015 project to Barefoot Planning in the amount of $19,325.
Thank you. Seconder? Yep. Comments, discussion? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Report, Communications Manager, Pergola Public Engagement and Installation Plan.
Thank you, Your Worship. As you know, in January 2015, the city acquired a set of iron pergolas from the Royal BC Museum. These were designed by John DeCastri, valued at over $120,000, and they have the potential to become a beautiful gathering place for the city. Council passed a motion to bring these pergolas to Colwood in February of 2015. During April and May, an interdisciplinary working group of staff got together to talk about the best uses and preferred locations for the pergolas. 15 sites were reviewed based on 9 criteria that the working group put together. So those criteria were that the site be city-owned, that it's a natural park-like setting for the pergolas, that it's visible to passers-by so it becomes a recognizable feature in the city, that it suits multi-purpose activities, that it has appropriate parking and accessibility features, it has easy access to active transportation routes, that it considers unmonitored uses, so in other words that there's community around it to see what's going on there, that the site would minimize costs to install things like electrical and irrigation, it may already have those features, and that there are no significant barriers to the time schedule. In other words, it's not a development property that we are relying on the developer to be ready for us to install them. So on June 25th, flyers were sent out to 125 homes in the area of Herm Williams Park, inviting residents to provide feedback on Herm Williams as a site. That was the site that rose to the top from the working group based on the criteria, because it's visible, it's accessible, it met all 9 criteria. So in addition to the flyers going out to homes, there was a poster posted on the fence at Herm Williams Park inviting people to take the survey and provide feedback to the city. We also posted a news item on the city website and invited the local paper to cover the story. It was posted on social media. 25 people responded to our survey. 4 people commented on Facebook and 2 used the city's online feedback form. Of these respondents, most people were positive about installing it at Herm Williams Park. In the report, it shows the ratings that they gave different aspects of suitability. Several comments were collected. The majority were positive. There were 5 or 6 comments that suggested alternate locations. Unfortunately, the folks who commented didn't have access to the full criteria and scoring information that the group had access to. But all that information is in the report. I won't read all of that. So the options at this point are to direct staff to install the pergolas at Herm Williams Park, This would show responsiveness to the public input that was gathered and would honor the Royal BC Museum's gift by installing these in a fairly timely way. Option 2 would be to direct staff to repeat the process of location assessment and public engagement. The impact of this is that the pergolas would likely remain in storage for an extended amount of time. And option 3 would be not to install the pergolas and to go back to Royal BC Museum to see if they have other options for using the pergolas. In terms of financial considerations, Council approved $26,000 to transport the pergolas to Colwood. It cost $18,000 to do that. The estimated cost to transport them from here now to Hermans Park is about $15,000, and the installation cost would be about another $15,000. So this report requests a total budget from gas tax of $22,000 to install them in 2015. In addition to that, there's a proposal to enhance the landscaping and signage in 2016 with an additional ask of $10,000 that would come forward to the budget deliberations for 2016. So the recommendation is that Council approve the installation of the DeCastro pergolas at Herm Williams Park at an estimated cost of $22,000 from gas tax, and that the proposed 2016 enhancements for seating and signage in the amount of $10,000 be forwarded to 2016 budget deliberations.
Move and recommendation.
Move the recommendation, Your Worship.
Seconder. Second. Laura. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I hate to be the wet blanket on this one. I really do. But it's a considerable amount of faith that the museum has put in us to become the custodians of those very special pergolas. And it's a considerable investment by the city to get those pergolas as far as they have got, to get them here, in the $18,000 that it costs to get them here, and in the additional $30,000 that it's going to cost to put them in place. Puts it right up there with, the cost of play structures in some of our parks. And so I just feel that we really need to get it right. And I'm not convinced that Herm Williams Park is the right place for them. In terms of people being able to come to that location and participate, Herm Williams is central, but I think that there could be a better location. There were a few locations that weren't considered. The perimeter park in Royal Bay, close to the school, would be the new high school would be another possible location. There is, I know it's mostly fairly steep, but there is a flatter area, or perhaps in one of the new park areas. I just think it might be a more community event oriented place. I think there's limitations for parking. And I know not everybody has to drive to an event, that transit is also important. But I'm just not convinced that Herm Williams is the right place for that infrastructure.
Other members of council? We have already gone through quite a public exercise on potential changes along the Kelly Roads locale there in that small connector that runs between us and VMP. I have taken an interest to see what sort of population does go in there, and we have numerous daycare centers that are in the adjacent area. In my mind's eye, I could see those being utilized as sort of a front back, that park people could enjoy the space. It could be also an enhanced transit pickup location. heaven forbid we get sewers and that sort of thing in there, we might be able to entertain washrooms and even a small water park plaza involved with it that I think would be very creative for kids of that age and keep them active in the park. That way I've heard comments from the daycare folks where they just get to the park and little Johnny has to go and everybody's got to join hands and cross the road and head on back to the classroom because there's lots of trees, but it's not appropriate. So it would be, I think, perceived well and used well at the end of the day. The nature of their build on them, and correct me, but they're the heavy Lexan or some sort of plasticized top on those things.
Mm-hmm. I think that's right.
I'd be concerned in some of the comments were around providing shade. That kind of rooftop doesn't usually provide shade, but turns it into more of a heat box, to be honest. And I know from times of my gazebo for my hot tub, and like you just couldn't go in there in the daytime. It was just too cooking. So I think staff have done an extensive consideration. I hear you in some of the other locations that might pop up as we move along, but it means that they're sitting on site with potential of deterioration instead of being used as might be envisioned in there. So I would like to see us work more to see how we can create the best possible little park there that we can. I've not yet seen anybody use that little basketball court in that little corner. That there has been no interest in there. Maybe it's because they don't pack balls with them or whatever, but that front corner piece in there could use a little bit of revitalization for sure. Anyone else? We have a motion and a seconder. Called the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Meadow Park update 6.4.4. That's the other park.
Hello. On this directed staff to go back and talk to the developer and discuss with the developer in moderation to the current concept for Meadow Park to reduce the financial impact in terms of ongoing maintenance. So that was done, but although we were asked to reduce it to a level deemed acceptable by council, we didn't actually know what that level would be. So the crux of what we've done is to talk about options of making it like other parks where we know what the maintenance cost is. So one option is a formal grass park with irrigation comparable to Herm Williams, but on a bigger scale. And the estimated cost to maintain that was $35,000 a year, I believe, if I'm looking at the right numbers here. Between $20,000 and $35,000 a year. It obviously wouldn't be exactly the same as Herm Williams, or a meadowgrass park, which means a lot less mowing, with a walking trail and garbage cans, etc. And only cutting the grass 1 to 3 times per month. And that was estimated to cost between $15,000 and $20,000, or a forested walking trail, which was estimated to be $20,000 to $25,000 for 2 years, and then drop as the trees became established. And option 4 is the original park, which we had originally described as probably costing about $54,000 a year, but with a high degree of uncertainty on that. So we've given a range for that one as well, 45,000 to 65,000. And staff have considered those options and what council might find acceptable. But these other options are really not in keeping with the vision, I think, for Royal Bay, which is of a very high-end development. And that's certainly what the developer is trying to do, is to produce a very high-end park that will attract people who are looking for a good place to live and a fine place to live, which of course in the end pays off in higher home values and higher taxes for the community. So we've recommended proceeding with the original park with the changes the council previously asked for, but have given the caveat in the financial implications that council should not accept staff's recommendation unless they're prepared to accept the inevitable effect on taxes. And that really is something council and only council can make a decision on. Is it worth the cost to have a park like that in the community? Now, I've attached the previous report so you can see in more detail the original financial implications. And that went into some detail about what the payback was in terms of increases in taxes over time from the properties that are going to be built. But it's very likely that this park would be built before more than 100 houses had been built of the 400 and odd that will surround it. So that payback in terms of higher taxes comes slowly. And if council does decide to go ahead with the park as designed, we don't feel that would be a commitment to do the same with the other sections of park that will come along. And this could remain as the central, most high quality piece of park, and the others could be developed more along the lines of our options to provide a bit of variety. It would appear to us that the developer's intention is that all the parks should have a coherent theme and continuity, but then of course whichever park you went to, you're in a very similar park to the others. So there are pros and cons for that. Thank you.
And anybody doing the recommendation?
Sure, I'll move the recommendation.
And a seconder? Discussion with?
Sorry, with that comment that council should only accept the staff recommendations if they're willing to accept it. Represents roughly 0.5%.
Yeah. Discussion. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I'm not willing to accept 0.5% for this particular park. And it's not that I don't support funding parks. I absolutely do. I feel that there is a considerable cost to this park. And I think that we are taking a liability on from the developer and getting very little benefit from it. I think that the park as designed with steep walls and potential hazards that have to be mitigated is going to be something that we deal with for many years to come. I applaud staff for having given us a range, because there definitely is a range in parks, and I would prefer to see a lower maintenance park that provided forested trail for people to walk through, and less liability for the city in future to deal with. We've come by our parks over a long period of time, and a lot of hard work and convincing has been done to get councils of the past to agree that parks were important and that they enhance the experience for our residents. So it's really out of character for me to speak against a park like this. But I just really feel that we need to take one step at a time. And Colwood Creek Park, for example, was not the most beautiful park to begin with. It was a mined-out gravel pit that had had all the topsoil stolen from it and sold off, and was supposed to be given to the city as a functioning 9-hole golf course. It never became that. But it did become a beautiful park that people are enjoying, that they're using. It did have a lot of flooding issues. It had a lot of water issues. And surprisingly, with a lot of good expertise from our staff, it has really improved in the last 10 years dramatically. So I'd like to see it grow and become something wonderful, but I don't want to have basically a dry irrigation ditch that's going to be full of invasive species for us to look after.
I'd just like to point out that there is no way to avoid the steep wall aspect under any of these options, because that's the nature of the fact that it is a very large drainage course, and where it goes under the road, there has to be a vertical drop in some aspect or other. We just need to have those fenced.
Thank you, Worship. I'm actually quite supportive of the original concept. I'm not entirely convinced that the maintenance costs will be as high as stated, but and I don't think that we afford the level of respect that our parks deserve currently. Not to say that staff don't do a good job, because they do a phenomenal job with the money that we provide them. It's council that hasn't, in my opinion, perhaps provided the amount of money that these parks deserve. So I think when we have an opportunity for someone other than the city taxpayer to create a park that all will use, that will be of high quality, high value, damn it, I think we should take them up on it, because our residents deserve it. And it won't be local residents that will be using that park. I walked that site actually this weekend, and I walk all our different parks. So darn it, I think all our residents deserve a high quality park. And although Colwood Creek Park has evolved, and it's better, but we need to be investing more into that park, because parks ought to be interesting visually, and it's a brown field right now, and it's boring. And I'm speaking as a resident that lives around there. It's highly used, and it is a beautiful park, don't get me wrong. But it needs some investment to make it, to step it up a bit. So I think we should not shy away from the opportunity to have a very high-quality park that our residents deserve. So that's my opinion. Thanks.
Councillor Knott.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I too support this. For once, we are getting a park that isn't vertical. This is going to be usable by people with strollers, with small children, with disability issues. Not many of our parks are. It's a beautiful, flat area. If it's landscaped as illustrated, it will be a real asset to Colwood, and I agree that people from all over Colwood will be using this park, not just Royal Bay residents. I wish we could do this kind of treatment to Pitt House Park. as it stands now, that's one of our premier waterfront parks, and it's all blackberry and broom. So I will be supporting this, and I would love to see council consider doing something with Pitt House Park.
Councillor Trace?
I'd just like to reiterate one concern I had previously, and that was having the playground so close to a water body. I know some times of the year it could be dry, but there's going to be months during the year where there could be, I think I was told that it could be up to 2 to 3 feet of water. So I do have a concern with small children near a water body.
Anyone else? Councillor Chong?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm also supporting the original plan. I think if we don't take this opportunity to do something different, that we might not get this opportunity again, and we might not consider it for the other parks along the process. And as was mentioned, it doesn't necessarily have to be a commitment. If it doesn't work, then we can change things around or not do it again. And so I think it's worth the while to try and make, a real showpiece. Thank you.
Thanks. Go ahead.
Thanks. I moved the motion, and obviously I'm supportive of it. But I also want to be very clear that I think it's a good economic decision, long term.
Question to staff. In the concept plans and drawings and little etchings and things like that, a lot of the trees are Gary oak, perhaps, and other more deciduous styled trees. Is there, a conversation to be had with the developer to see that maybe it phases into, different kinds of trees in there that might give more longevity in forest and less work on cleaning up?
You're thinking more native conifers,
Yeah.
for instance. Yeah, we can certainly have that conversation. I still think that there ought to be discussions to minimize the cost given the standard they're shooting for.
Anyways, anyone else? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Economic Development and Innovation Committee, recommendation of hiring an economic development officer. Councillor Martin?
Thank you. Basically, there was discussion at the last economic development meeting regarding if we should defer waiting on hiring a economic development officer until a CAO was hired, or if we should move forward. That discussion occurred, and basically the decision was made that we should get the process moving forward, and that council should not defer the hiring of an economic development officer and consider the position as a one-year contract position, and I'll make that motion in a second. The other issue that our CAO could probably address, I'm not sure if it's going to be in this one or the next one, I think it's this one, just regarding the position either lying outside of the union or lying within the union, and since his expertise lies in that, I'll actually allow him to discuss that portion of it.
Well, Your Worship, there was a considerable amount of discussion at the Economic Development Committee with respect to this matter. The committee asked a couple of questions, whether this could be potentially an excluded position as opposed to one that was in the union, and there was also some concerns expressed about, the flexible hours nature, or potentially flexible hours nature of this particular position, because it would be envisaged that there would be occasional weekend work and attending various functions outside of the core work hours. On the exclusion issue, given the past history and the letters of understanding and agreement in your collective agreement with the union and other positions of a similar nature, which are deputy director level positions, the communications officer positions, all of which that are in the union, also a very clear letter of understanding about not filling any further excluded positions until the termination of the current collective agreement. Really, this is it's properly positioned in the union. I think there are mechanisms, and we have already had an initial discussion with the union about a letter of understanding to address the one-year trial aspect of this, as well as the flexible hours nature of this. The union is certainly receptive to that. The committee wishes to proceed with this on the basis of, I would call it a one-year trial as opposed to a contract, whereby after 1 year, obviously the whole service would be reviewed, whether council wished to make any changes to the scope of the function, or indeed if council wished to continue performing the service, but also the nature of the position and to review the job description after 1 year. So short answer to the question is that it would be, in our recommendation, a unionized position, but that there be a letter of understanding negotiated with the union to address a 1 year trial for the position, and also the issue of flexible hours.
And so in addition to that, there are basically three motions. You can see the first, it's basically that the motion, or that we do not defer. If you actually move to the third motion, that the Economic Development Officer report directly to the Chief Administration Officer. At one point, the position was going to be reporting to the Director of Planning, and the committee made the decision that it would be better suited. And so motion number 2, that our citizen, Doug Kobayashi, the Chief Administration Officer and the Director of Planning, be appointed to members of the hiring panel. But I would make a suggestion that since we've moved it to the CAO, that we actually, and it's already been discussed with staff, that the Director of Planning is not involved, but the Communication Officer is. So I would actually make an amendment to that motion where it's that Doug, the CAO, and the Communications Officer be appointed as members of the hiring panel, and that the Colwood standard hiring and interview process be followed. So I'll make a motion to that effect.
Seconder?
Got that, Sam?
I'll second that.
Discussion, Council? Councillor Date?
Thank you. Just in reading through the recommendation, and I know he has great skills, but having a citizen representative sit in with the hiring panel, I'm just not sure if that's normal city administrative process, and I just wondered if staff could speak to that.
I'll certainly let staff discuss about the appropriateness. I know, though, that the reason the committee selected Doug was because he's actually hired economic development officers for the interior. So he's actually been involved in, I think, 3 or 4 economic development officers. So he already has that expertise, and he certainly has that expertise when it comes to hiring staff from his previous career.
Well, Your Worship, from my perspective, when I had an initial discussion with the union on this position, and of course under the collective agreement, they are given 30 days to. We can't just proceed immediately with a posting. We have to give them 30 days to comment on the job description, and we're working up a draft letter of understanding on the issue of the 1 year trial and the flexible hours, which I'd also give to them at that time. I didn't have a discussion with them about the composition of the interview panel. Personally, I don't see an issue with that, given that you do have a standing committee system. It's a standing committee system or an advisory committee system where you have citizen representation on that committee. As far as I'm concerned, there's a logical, there's a rationale to having a citizen rep on the interview panel for this particular position, given that the position will report to the Economic Development Committee, plus the added benefit of Mr. Kobayashi does have some fairly extensive experience in the economic development function.
Councillor Day?
I'll raise that issue with the union.
Yeah, I just I have a great respect for Mr. Kobayashi. So it isn't at all about him personally. It's just about being sure that we're on the right side with our union and with all of those particular issues, because I think it's very important that we maintain our working relationship at the highest level.
Councillor Logan?
Thank you, Worship. Through you to the CAO. Wondering, and I know it's covered in 6.5.2, sort of, but the regarding the subject twos, a local agreement for flexible hours, and I'm just wondering if you need the subject two added to this motion so that subject to a local agreement being negotiated with union on the flexible hours, blah, 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 that we move with the creation of a economic development officer. I say that because we need a little bit of leverage. Council doesn't want to hire somebody without that flexibility. And I know we made it a condition when we established a second municipal enforcement officer that we will have this flexibility, or that position's not created. It's a bit of a hammer, but I just want to make sure that the city's protected and it's not solely a Monday to Friday. There's that expectation set.
Your Worship, I believe that might be covered on page 189 in the motion further on with respect to the draft job description and authorizing the CAO to enter into discussions with the union to secure and endorse an agreement with the union, sanction the hiring of an EDO in a contractual position for a period of 1 year with a flexible hour work schedule. So what is envisaged here is that we would approach the union with the draft job description, which is set out in your package, but there'd be a companion letter of understanding, which we've worked up in draft form. There has to be a little more internal work, but it would essentially address two issues. One, the 1 year, I prefer to call it sort of a trial nature of this position. And the second component that would be addressed would be the flexible hours. And it would be specifically, well, let me deal with the first issue first. When we're talking about a trial, the initial discussion we've had with the union is this may not happen, but let's say after 1 year, and you would post the position and clearly indicate that it would be a 1 year term position, an auxiliary position or whatever language we come up with, but that if council decided that after 1 year we're not satisfied with either the incumbent or we just don't want to continue the service, our priorities have changed, that we would be in a position to essentially terminate the employment relationship, and there would not be left one vacant union position. We've made that very clear with them. That if council decided not to continue the service, we wouldn't be obligated to refill the position as an economic development officer, or the union would come back and say, oh, you owe us one more position. We don't want to go there. So that's one thing the letter of understanding would address. And the second component is the flexible hours, because we do know that for a position like this, yeah, it's a 5 day a week, 7 hours a day, generally speaking, but there would be occasions that on a Sunday afternoon at the Union Club or something, the province is entertaining a delegation from Japan, the Japan consulate, and they've invited all of the region's economic, the chambers and everything, and this position would have to attend that. We wouldn't want to be in a position where we'd be paying overtime for all of those outside the working hours events. So we'd structure the letter of understanding that basically it's 5 days a week, 7 hours a day. However, when those events are anticipated, the management would have the authority to say, look, okay, so don't come in Thursday because you're going to have to spend 2 or 3 hours over the course of the next couple of weeks, each week on these events, right? So it's a flexible.
Oh yeah, and I understand that, but I guess I'm saying I'm wondering if they say, nah, we're not interested in the flexible hours aspect. Would it then come back to council to say, okay, let's reevaluate because it's not meeting our conditions that we we're interested.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we'd approach it as a package. And as I say, we've had those initial discussions with them because the Economic Development Committee took this in stages. We put a draft job description before them. They endorsed it in principle. They added some further comments. We talked about the flexible hours and the one-year trial. I said, well, let me get back to you. We did some further research. We talked to the union. The initial indications we have is that they're receptive to entertaining that sort of a discussion. If, though, at the end of the day, we're not in agreement, we can't reach a meeting of the minds on the letter of understanding, I'm going to have to come back to council for direction.
That's perfect. Thank you.
So back to because we kind of crossed over between those two very similar items. So we're back into the previous one where the recommendation is that Doug Kobayashi, the Chief Administrative Officer, and the Director of Communications be appointed as members of the hiring panel, and that Colwood's standard hiring and interview process be followed. Have I got that correct?
Yeah, but it's that one too.
Yeah, and then the second part is that the Economic Development Officer report directly to the Chief Administrative Officer.
And there's the one ahead of that the council approved.
You want all three in one? Okay. And that council not defer the hiring of the Economic Development Officer and consider the position term as a one-year trial contract position?
Your Worship, I would prefer to use that wording because that's the way we would approach it fundamentally through the letter of understanding.
Okay. With all three of those, then, you're the mover?
I am.
Shaker is where? Seconder? You seconded? Councillor Nault?
Yes, one further question on Mr. Kobayashi being appointed. Personnel matters are usually handled in camera. Identities of candidates are confidential, and the interviews are confidential. Is there any instrument in place to ensure that a citizen representative respects those confidentialities?
I believe if we look at our procedure bylaw, when it speaks to our various committees that we have as well that also have citizen members, a lot of those committees, standing committees, commissions, are also allowed to have in-camera meetings, and so anybody who's serving on those committees or commissions are bound by confidentiality just as council is.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that was in place. I have no problem with him. He sounds very qualified for the job.
Councillor Day?
I have to respectfully disagree with the Director of Administration because it was a fundamental area in which I disagreed. There's only once that committee has met in camera, and we were very careful, and we had legal advice that said we could not share in-camera information. So it is definitely a gray area, and just from my personal feelings on the matter, I think if Mr. Kobayashi is very professional, I believe that he will treat things with the appropriate confidentiality, but if we wanted to ensure that he was bound by any oath of confidentiality, we would have to ask him to take one, and none of our committee members have ever been asked to take an oath. I do have the members of the Family Court Committee take an oath.
Any further comments?
If we'd like to get clarification, we can put this on the table for the moment. I can get the procedure bylaw and see if the current procedure bylaw speaks to the committees themselves. My understanding is that they do, but I also am working on a complete rewrite with Councillor Terry Trace, and I might be confusing with what we're proposing to what actually currently exists. So I'm happy to go have a look.
So we can put it aside for the time being, carry on to the next part, and allow staff to go and check that and bring it back? Will that change or support you one way or the other?
I guess I'd be happy to know the answer.
Okay. Then motion to table for the time being while we get that information. Seconder? Thank you. We will proceed to the next item while you're digging that up. 6 point. Pardon? Oh, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. To be tabled. So we have 3 against and 4 for. Moving on, then we'll get into the discussion on 6.5.2 recommendation final draft update on economic development position, funding, and next steps. Councillor Martin?
I think we've already talked about it, but
I think we have. But
so I'll
recommendation
just make the motion since we've already discussed it, which was my computer just
trial contract.
Sorry, give me un momentos. That the final draft description for the economic development officer be approved as presented, and that subject to council's endorsement of the draft job description, the CAO enter into discussions with the union to secure and endorse an agreement with the union sanctioning the hiring of the economic officer in a trial contractual position for a period of 1 year with a flexible hourly schedule that suits me.
Seconder?
Okay, you can forget that last part.
Do we have a seconder?
I'll second it as not
discussion.
amended.
Discussion. Without the personal comment. Any discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Next item, recommendation community profiling program.
I was going to
6.5.3, and who would you like to?
I would like our wonderful communications person who's worked diligently on this to fill us all in.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. So the second recommendation of our economic development strategy, the first being that we hire an economic development officer, the second recommendation was that we create an innovative community profile to showcase the city's competitive advantage to investors, potential developers, as well as the public. So this would be about creating an innovative web-based community profile, as well as some print products that could be distributed through the chamber, through businesses, and it would highlight everything about our competitive advantage, including our waterfront, our affordability, available land, growth potential in the city. There's more research to be done, but it's just about showcasing what Colwood offers to potential investors. So that is what the community profile is about.
And I would, in addition to that, I would encourage council members to, if you are all interested, to try and make a point of actually coming to some of our economic development meetings, because Sandra spent a fair amount of time actually showing us other municipalities and what they're doing from a web-based thing, which was excellent. So if you're not there, you don't get to see it. That's my plug. You're welcome.
There you go. Need a motion and a seconder?
I'll move it, sure.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor Day?
Just a question, because I've been following economic development officers and their programs around the province when we attend UBCM and AVICC for quite a while. Is there a direction that you're going towards? Some of them look like just real estate advertising that they come up with, and some of them look like trying to get doctors and professionals to set up business within a particular community. So can you just maybe give us a short glimpse, being as I was not able to get to the meeting for the full-on brochure?
Mm-hmm. So we do need to do some more research about what we focus on in terms of what Colwood offers. But the economic development strategy does have a whole lot of statistics about best practice from other communities, what we should focus on in Colwood, and so we have some guidance on that. In terms of, the project would be to analyze that, present to council how we want to present that, and bring it back. So I don't have a really good answer to that yet, but that would be part of what we would be doing. Yeah.
Councillor Knoll?
Yes, I had one question on this. There is no financial impact mentioned, and there is no written report that went with the Economic Development Committee meeting. So I'm wondering, totally in the dark, as to where the funding from this comes from or how much is expected.
In the 2015 budget, there was $6,000 approved to put toward this in 2015. I apologize for not having a report. I wasn't clear that this was coming forward this way. But yeah, so there's $6,000 in this year's budget to get a start on this project.
Thank you.
Stealing my thunder, Councillor Nault. Any other questions? Seeing none, call the question on the motion. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Moves us down, I believe, with waiting for this one, into our bylaws. So we'll move into that, and hopefully staff will be back with us shortly. 7.1, bylaw number 1584, first, second, and third readings. City of Colwood Subdivision and Development Bylaw 1995, amendment number 52.
Move introduction.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed?
Move second.
Motion carried.
Second.
Discussion? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Third.
Move third.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. 7.2, bylaw number 1580, first, second, and third readings, Colwood Main Sewer Local Area Service Bylaw, Establishment and Loan Authorization, bylaw number 598, 2001, amendment number 31.
Move introduction.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Move second.
Discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Move third.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. 7.3, bylaw number 1586, again, first, second, and third readings, Colwood Main Sewer Local Area Service Bylaw, Establishment and Loan Authorization, bylaw number 598, 2001, amendment number 33.
Move introduction.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Move second.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Third.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We can, are you ready there to go? Motion to lift from the table, please. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Staff?
Okay, so as you know, this is a very large bylaw, so it took a few minutes to find it. I think the way our bylaw is actually worded is a little bit confusing, so it's something that Councillor Trace and I can take note of. So under the section 18 of bylaw 754, it speaks about attendance of public at meetings. Subsection A is subjection to provisions of the community charter. All council meetings must be open to the public. Subsection B speaks to where council wishes to close a meeting. They may do so by stating a resolution in a public meeting. The fact that the meeting is to be closed and the basis under which the meeting is to be closed pursuant to the community charter. And the confusing part for me is subsection C says this section applies to meetings of bodies referred into the community charter, including without limitation select or standing committees, committees comprised solely of council, board of variance, committee of the whole. But I don't believe that that's actually speaking to the idea of in camera. I think that's speaking to the idea of attendance at public meetings. So Councillor Day is probably correct. I do know that there is authority for all kinds of bodies to have in-camera meetings, but I don't believe our procedure bylaw is speaking to allowing those bodies to have in-camera meetings. Our preference has been anything that deserves an in-camera discussion should probably sit at the council table, and that's been our practice for many, many years, except that one she referred to in the past. So,
And that's what's currently before us, not in the revised
correct.
Working one.
Yeah, the other one is still a work in progress.
Yeah. So, Council, how are you feeling? Councillor Null.
Would it be possible to just get him to sign a statement saying he will respect confidentiality?
Absolutely.
I would be quite happy if we could do that as a condition of him on the committee.
Councillor Day.
Thanks. I just want to say thank you for that, and thank you for the indulgence. It isn't today's issue that I'm actually concerned about. It's for us to understand what our limitations are and how we operate for the future.
So further to the recommendation before us that included the CAO, Mr. Kobayashi, and our Director of Communications, will somebody be willing to add a second part to that motion that says that in this instance, citizen member Doug Kobayashi to sign an oath of confidentiality? Is that what we're looking for?
Your Worship, yes, I think that's appropriate. I'm not concerned about that aspect. Again, though, I just want to remind Council that that particular aspect of an outside person external to the organization, I did not address that with the union. So it's something I certainly would raise. Yep. I don't anticipate that the union would have a concern about that. They may, in which case I would have to come back to Council and seek some direction.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so can somebody move that add-on, please?
I'll move that as an amendment.
Councillor Nault and Councillor Trace. Then a...
I have a comment.
Yes?
I don't have an issue with it, but I don't understand it because, you know, I go to West Shore Park and Rack, we have citizen reps and we go in camera every meeting. And we've never taken an oath. So I'm not really exactly sure why we're all worked up about this, but I'll support it, but it seems silly to me.
Councillor Day.
I don't believe there's an oath at West Shore Parks and Rec, but you're a member of a society. You're a named member of that society, even as a citizen rep, which is different than being a member of a committee.
Call the question then on our amended motion. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. That brings us back again, folks, into bylaw section 7. We covered off 2 of them. So we're at 7.3, bylaw number 1586. First, second, and third readings. Colwood Main Sewer Area Service Bylaw and Establishment number... Oh, no, we did 33, did we not? I'm just reading farther in there. So 7.4, bylaw number 1587, first, second, and third readings, Colwood Central Sewer.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
Move second.
Second.
Discussion? Anyone? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Second, third.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Bylaw number 1561 for final reading, Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Bylaw number 1561, 2015. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Final item this evening, 7.6, bylaw number 1590, first and second readings. Colwood Land Use Bylaw 1989, amendment number 146.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Discussion? Question? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. That's it for this evening, folks. Happy summer.
Move adjournment.